Hello everybody and welcome to EBN. Today we are building an expense tracker system. Now this is not very complex topic to explore, so I urge you to pause the video and think for a few seconds what all features do you think a system like this should have. You can add all those features by forking my GitHub repository. Now let's dig in. So firstly we have our register and login system. I'm not going to register as a new user because I already have an account. So firstly we are going to register or login. I'm not going to register because I already have an account. So we are going to sign in with my default ID Azure and our password. And voila, this is our home page. We have on our left here a monthly expense bar chart, which is showing expenses for every month. On our right here, we have those expenses as a list with from date and to date, etc. And below here, we have a little form. This form is it also has a little checkbox to check if we are going to add a long-term liability or a short-term daily expense. Let's try adding a long-term liability. Let's say I bought a phone for some amount, I don't know, $500, and on an EMI for an year, 2024. The interest rate should be around 7%. And see, we have added that phone loan for an year and our bar chart has included that expense. And in this list, we have our phone loan displayed with $43 per month EMI. It works great. So let's get into the implementation nitty-gritty. Okay, first of all, you have to make a virtual environment, which I have already created here. When I have named it Finven, I'll list all the libraries we are going to need in my GitHub repository and the YouTube description below. I've already activated my virtual environment. You can activate that by the command source, going to the directory, bin directory, and then activate fish. Let's start our Django admin project. Django admin start project expense tracker. We'll go to our expense tracker project and start an app called, I don't know, I'm not creative with names, expense tracker. You can name it anything, you can name it much more creatively, but I am not gonna do so. Okay, so first of all, we have to change our settings, project settings.py, to include the installed app, which is X-Tracker. We are also going to edit our static directory here. We are going to add a slash here. And after this, we also have to add this static files directories equal to os dot path dot join static. So basically this little line here is gonna join our base directory and static directory together and store it in the static files directory so that a Django application know where to look for to search static directory. And the static URL is gonna store all our static things like our style sheets, our images, our JavaScript files on our URL slash static. Alright then, let's save this. Let's see if our system is running. It's not because OS is not defined. We also have to import OS here. Import OS. Now this should work. It does. I start a Firefox repository and go to our base page, and our system is working perfectly. Okay, let's add our database now. We can start with anything here, but I like to start with databases in most of our applications because before starting UI, you must have a proper working backend. At least that's what I feel. So in our models.py, we are gonna import some stuff before going in. We will need dates to store dates from datetime, import datetime, and I think that's enough for now. So you see we had this date and end date column in our application, and that's why we are importing datetime here. We'll start creating our class account first. Model, we're gonna have an account. Why an account? Because any expense you have, it should be associated with some account. This will be your user account, right? I will not add an S here because Django application will do that for me. Now, whoever owns this account should have a name. That's what we are gonna give it here. Our field. This could be a real name, your alias, whatever. We're gonna give it a max length of 100. And this account should have some expense associated with it. This expense will be, because we are basically creating an expense tracker system, so it obviously should have expense field. We're gonna give it 0 default value. Now we have a name of the user, but we also need a user who's gonna use this account, right? We're gonna use Django's default user model auth.user, and this will be a foreign key which will have on delete equal to models.cascade effect. You can hover on our cascade function here and read what it does. Well, it doesn't say here. Basically, it's gonna delete all the fields associated with that user here in the account field, in the account column table. Then we are gonna have some liability list, or we can add, say, it expense list, because that's what we are making. Models dot many to many fields. We are going to give this expense because that's what our next class will be. We are going to create a class called expense which will store our expenses, and list of all those expenses will be stored in our account through this many to many relationship. If you have learned some DBMS, you would know what many to many relationship is. If you do not, I recommend looking it up. Basically, making a relationship between every field of this table to every other field of that table. We're gonna give it blank equal to true value because it could be blank. There could be no expenses for any user, at least when it's starting out. And I think that should be enough. Next, we're gonna create a class expense with models.model. We're gonna have some name here for the expense like car loan, home loan, whatever. We're gonna do that in char field of some max length. I think 100 should be enough. You can give it more if your needs are like that. There should be some amount associated with that. With any expense, models dot float field default equal to 0. Now we are going to add our date field, models dot date field. It should always have a value. It should never be null. We can set a default value for this. If we are setting something of as null false, we should add a default value for it. Date time, I misspelled. Date time dot now dot date. We're gonna call our datetime function and get today's date. Then Sorry. Then we need a Boolean function to Boolean field to check if the expense is short term, one time, or long term. We're gonna add a Boolean field here. Boolean field default equal to false. It should have a value always. It could be true, it could be false, but it must have a value. Then if we have a long-term field, if it's a long-term liability, we must have a interest rate associated with it, which will be a float field. We can have a default equal to 0. It can be null or blank, because it's possible that if the short-term expenses there is no interest rate, or it could be a long-term expenses, still there is no interest rate, right? And then an end date, which should again be a date field and should again have a null equal to false and blank equal to false. I'm sorry, true, not false. True value, because it could be blank, it could be null. Then we are gonna calculate our monthly expenses and store them in this field, which will be a float field again. And this will be again same as above, default equal to 0, null equal to true, blank equal to true. It could be blank, right? For short-term expenses, for a one-time expense, there is no monthly expense. Then what user is doing all this? What user is associated with this expense? We must add that. We are gonna again use the same foreign key as above. Foreign key auth dot user on delayed models dot cascade. We do not have a primary key, but we have two foreign keys to another table which has a primary key, right? So this is a good database, in case anybody was wondering if why we do not have a primary key. Now we're gonna add a calculate monthly expense function for self. This will basically calculate the monthly expense and store it in the monthly expense field. Now we need to know if it's a long-term investment or a short-term investment. If it's a long-term, then only we need to calculate this monthly expense, right? We're gonna go self long-term. If self dot interest rate equal to 0. Now interest rate could be 0 in long-term expense, and for that we just need to return the amount divided by the number of months divided by number of days in those months, right? So we're going to return self.amount. You can do this on paper to see if this formula works or not. Self.endDate minus self.date and divide this by 30. This parentheses is not going to do, but it will make it clear what we are doing. We are subtracting today's date from the end date and then dividing that by 30 to get the number of months and how much amount we have to pay in those months. We are then dividing that. Now if this is not true, what we are going to do, number of months is equal to, we're going to store number of months here, which will be end date dot year minus, I think we are assuming something here. We are going to assume that the long-term expense is going to start from today. We are not assuming that it's going to start from some arbitrary date, which could be a negative point, and you can fix that by cloning or forking the GitHub repository. Now we'll multiply this by 12, get the number of months, add the end date month in it, end date dot month, and subtract today's month again. Then we're going to calculate the monthly rate. You can calculate this by the yearly interest rate, but I'm going to make it a bit more clearer by doing so by monthly rate, which is basically divide interest rate by 12 and then divide by 100 for making it more clear. Because right, 15%, sorry, for example, 15% interest is equal to 15 by 12% of monthly interest, and percent is basically 100. Therefore, 15 by 12 by 100. I hope this makes it clear. Then we are going to just calculate our monthly expense, which will be self.amount, whatever amount we have, multiplied by the monthly rate. Now this function, this formula I'm writing here, I will provide a little explanation for it in the description section of my video. So check that. Okay, right, this should work. There should be another else here for considering the possibility that it's not long term, it's a short term expense. Then we are just gonna return self dot monthly expense, whatever the default value is, which is 0, I believe. Not expense, this expense. Okay, this should work. Now to store this monthly expense whenever our liability model is called, we must do something here which is called overriding. We're gonna add overriding, method overriding. We're gonna do method overriding for save function or save method of Django.models. It's gonna take 3 arguments: itself, the auth, and kwr. What this is gonna do, if self dot long term is true, it's gonna store the monthly expense in self.monthly expense. Now these two ifs are redundant and you can remove it if you want. It is gonna work just fine, but I'm not doing so. Now these two ifs are a bit redundant and you can remove it. It's gonna work just fine, but I'm not gonna do so to keep it clear why we are using it and what it's need. Okay, we have overridden the method and now we have to call the super method. This method basically calls the super class, which is this class here, this model, and edits it if we have edited anything here, and then again stores it in the database, right? So we're expenses self dot save. We're gonna call the save, which we have just overridden, and pass our args and AW args, whichever argument Django needs to pass itself, right? This should work just fine. Okay, one extra space there and one less space there. We are going to fix that to be in accordance with the PEP8 documentation of Python. Our models field is complete. And once our models field is complete, we must Django is giving us our error. You have 18 unapplied migrations. We're going to apply those migrations like so. Make migrations. We made our migrations. We made our tables. We made our models, everything, and then we migrate that. Voila, it's done. We can run server again and it works without any errors. So our models are error free. Now our work here is done, I think. Okay, then we are gonna start adding our views.py function here. Before doing so, we are gonna create our templates directory to store all our templates, and here we are gonna have a directory to store Xtracker files. another to store registration files, login, register pages. I think 2 should be enough. 2 is enough. Maybe another for home. It's not needed. It's not necessary to create all the directories, but it's good practice. Okay, then in our expense tracker, we're gonna create an HTML file. We'll call it expenses list.html. Same with our home. Same with our registration register.html. Another one for login.html. Right, like so. Now in our views.py, we are gonna add some functions here. Firstly, we'll add redirect. We are also gonna import some more features for some more modules here. Import HTTP response. One very important module here is Django.contrib.auth URLs or auth models. Import user. We are gonna import our user model, which we just used in our models.py as a foreign key. With this model, we are also gonna include some more functions for this model. Django.contrib.auth import authenticate, login, and logout. To create a form for this registration features, login and signing in, we're gonna add some forms for auth, import user creation form. This is for registration basically. Then we are gonna add our own models which we just created. They are stored in X tracker. Import models, and then from dot models import count expense. Is that expense or expenses? Expense. Right. Like so. Oh, I'm sorry. It should be in different line. Yep. Next we are gonna import what we are gonna import. We are gonna import. Next we are gonna import from Django.views.generic import template view. What this template view does basically, it renders a template. We pass it the path to the template and it will render it. We don't have to call the render function. It's class-based template. You can look it up on our the Django documentation. Next, we'll include some more generic views, which like Django.views.generic edit import form view, because we are gonna edit a form view. Just copy this for list view, which we are not gonna edit, and I think we will also need date time, so we include that as well, or import. I believe these should be enough for now. Next, we are gonna start creating a function. Firstly, we'll create a home function to display our home page. User equal to request dot user, or we don't have to do this. We can write if request dot user dot is authenticated, we display some page, and if it's not authenticated, we display some other page. But right now we have not created our authentication feature, so we are just gonna render request X tracker. This was the name of our expensive home, and in the home we are gonna render home.html. Like so. Then we create another function here for registration. This is gonna check if the request method is post if we have to store some data or send some data to the server. Then it's a post method. Then we'll create a form with the user creation form. You can read about it in this little tooltip here, which is not coming for some reason. In the user creation form, we write request.post because that's the argument. We either pass get argument or post argument. And if form dot is valid, if the data entered by the users are valid, then we are gonna do something. What we are gonna do? We are gonna register them. We are gonna save that user, and then we are gonna log in with that user. And after the user has logged in, after the user has logged in, we are gonna redirect to the home page. We are gonna send the user back to the home page because that's where the magic will happen. Save that. Now, if the form is not valid, we are gonna just create another form for the user, or we can just put this else here because it will be in the same loop. User creation form, and in the end we're gonna return render request registration, which will be our page for the registration form. We're gonna pass this dictionary value here to know what the values are for the password and username. Now I will quickly get my CSS files for this, which I'm not going to explain. You can though text me and to find why I used anything in my CSS file. Okay, now we have our registration function ready, registration page ready. We're going to go to our register.html and start writing our template for register. Now first of all, we are going to load our static files, the static directory where our CSS will be stored. Then we're gonna link our style sheet here using this type text CSS hyperlink to static CSS login styles CSS. That's what my login CSS name is. Next, we're gonna start our block content. Keep in mind that you need one block content on your template file with a corresponding end content or end block to write Django. Now in our block content, we are going to add a form method equal to post. In this form method, we are going to include a class to contain a container class for our form, another class for the form container, and one for blur background. Now one class for our form. Div class equal to form. Now we start writing our form. First we are going to give it a h2 heading for some style, text align center, and write sign up. This will be our sign up page. So we are going to write that. Below that, we are going to start including our form tags, form field, username, label tag. For our username label, we are going to add a break line here. Then below that, it will be our username field, the input type field, another break line, and then we are gonna add our form dot password one label tag. This will be our initial password, and then the Django application again asks for a password confirmation. That will be password 2. Those are default names in Django. Another BR tag, form.password1 input field. Just copy paste this here for password 2, like so. Close our div here, add a break line, then we'll add our submit button, another div claw button container. Here we'll start make a button tag. We're gonna give it button primary, some classes here, some default classes which you can use in CSS or JavaScript to add some functionality. It will be called register. The form will end and end block will end. Okay, let's load this. Accounts. We have not added anything in our urls.py yet, hence you're not gonna see anything here. We need to go to our urls.py of project first, and then add. Firstly, we'll import include function here. Then we are gonna add here the name of our app and urls.py of that app, right? Our extracker dot urls, which we are gonna include like so. Save that. Giving some error here. We do not have an extracker. Now we will make our extracker URLs to fix this error. New file urls.py. Now this should have a URLs patterns here. Firstly, we'll import some things from Django.urls import path and include like so, and then we'll also import our views functions because that's what we are gonna render on our URLs. URL patterns, create a list, and start adding stuff. First, on our default page, we'll have a views.home. We're going to give it a name as home. Then we'll have a path for our accounts, register, where we're going to register our self. We are going to render views.register for that page. And let's name that register. Another one we're going to have path accounts. This will be the default account for the default path for Django URLs for our login and logout forms. Views.register. We do not have to call views.register. We're going to have to call include here for django.contrib.auth.urls. Right? Since this is a list, we must add commas here. We must separate all the values by comma. User creation form module not found. Django contrib auth form does not exist. We must fix that error. On line 5, I think it's called forms. Yep, it's fixed. Let's go to our channel, go to our page, and we have our sign up page here. We also have our accounts login page, but we have not written the HTML template for this since, and that's why that's not visible. Let's go back and start writing our login HTML. It will be sort of our register template, hence we are going to copy paste some stuff and then edit as we wish to do. There will be no password 2 here, so we're going to remove that. There will also be no password 1 here, so we can remove that as well. We're going to change some things here. We do not need these break lines and these. There will be 2 break lines just here. You can add CSS classes for this and you won't need these break lines. We change this to sign in. Also, we change our input type button to, we are button type to input and value to login. It will close like so. We won't need this. Below our form method, we're going to include our CSRF token. So that there is no cross cookie connection here. And above our form method post, whose action will be URL login. It's sending any data to it will go to the URL login link. And above this form method, if we are going to check if the form has errors, I'm going to display a little message here that your username and password didn't match. Please try again. Let's end this if block like so, and I think this should be enough. Let's go check our page, which is here, account login. See, this works. Right. Now let's start building our expense list page. We're going to add that as well here. Path expenses views dot expense list view. We can name it anything, but I'm going to call it that. Dot as view, comma here, and this works perfectly. Now we do not have a view because we have not written that yet. We are going to write it right below this. Add another space here. Def expense list view. In our expense list view, we need some things. We need a model. We need to display graph. We need to display the list. We need to display the form. There are a bunch of things we must display here. So first of all, before going any further, we are gonna add the forms.py for this, because we are gonna need that to create our expense list form. And let's write this. This will be a very easy thing to set up. We need to import forms, and then from our models, we need to import expense. Class expense form, forms.model form. Now firstly, we need to check for our form, we need to consider that long-term boolean value, right? So we are gonna write that first. Long-term equal to, this will be the default setting for that whenever the page is loaded. required equal to false, right? Then we're going to create a meta class. In this meta class, we'll have our model as expense, fields for that model. We had name, amount, interest rate, date, end date, long term. You can store this in any order you like. Next, we'll have some widgets for this, which will be a dictionary. For our name, we're going to have forms dot text field, text input. You can use default register with the command like form dot as p on our template, but we are not going to use that. We're going to create our own form here. Forms dot text input. So attributes equal to another dictionary here, class. We are naming these for our styling purposes. We are going to use these in our CSS to provide any styling to this, right? We're going to copy paste this a bunch of times here. For amount, for date, for interest rate, for end date, and another for long term. Amount will be a float input or a number input. This will be a form. Date input. This will display a little calendar for selecting the date. Interest rate will again be a number input. End date will be a date input. And long term will be a checkbox input for the boolean, right? Like so. Now for these date inputs, we also have to add some more attributes apart from class. We need to tell our file that we have this date input is actually of type date. Same here. Our date input is of type. Date input is of type date, like so. Now we need to clean these inputs, whatever we have provided here. User can provide anything random which should not be accepted. That's why we're gonna clean these inputs with our def clean self. Our clean data will be cleaned using super. And now we have to write our logic for our long term. If we have a long term set as true, then there must be some value in the interest rate and in the end date. Otherwise, it's not needed, right? So we're gonna get a long term equal to clean data dot get long term value, start date as well, which will be our date, clean data dot, sorry, not pet, we have to get date. I didn't include this here. Now if our long term value is set to true, interest rate will be equal to clean data dot get interest rate similarly the end date the amount, and then the cleaned data for long term will be set to true. Now if if it was false, then we just need two types of data: clean data, end date equal to none, and interest rate equal to none. And at the end, we're gonna return cleaned data. So our forms.py is complete. We're gonna close that, come here and start writing our views for expense list. Now since we're using a form here, we do not need a expense list function. Instead, we'll need a class for that, and instead of providing request argument, we'll provide the form view which we imported in the beginning. It's for a view for displaying a form and rendering a template response. The template view renders template, form view renders forms, right? Now here we will also use the template view. For giving our template name here, we're gonna call it expenses and name it expense list.html. Form class equal to expense form that we just created in our forms.py. This one. And then we need success URL. This will be the default homepage URL because we are gonna edit our home in a bit. Def form valid self form. If our form is valid, what do we do? If form valid, we call that in our expense select. Okay, now where did we do? In our login, we checked if form has errors, the form was valid. That's the function we have to write here. It's a default function for Django, and it's the default forms, but since we are creating a form, we need to write that. It will first take the account model, account objects, get or create, user equal to, I am sorry, get or create, user equal to self dot request dot user. Next we need our expense equal to expense name equal to form dot cleaned data name. That's what we're gonna store in our expense model here. For amount, for interest rate, date, end date, and I think long term, we should be enough. Since it's a tuple, we must add the commas here. We have amount, we have interest rate, we have date, we have end date, we have the long-term value, the boolean value, and we also must need a user. with whom the data is associated with, like so. Now we're gonna save this expense is calling our overridden function. Here's where we're calling that overridden function we created in our models.py, if you remember, this def save, right? Now account dot liability, I'm sorry, account dot expense list add expense. That expense list will have all the list of all the expenses, and then we return super dot form valid form. Now we need another function here to get the context data, which we are gonna pass to our HTML for graph, for the list, etc. Context data, get context data, or set context data, whatever you want to name it. Self, some default arguments, context equal to super dot get context data, runtime arguments, user equal to self dot request user, with whom the data is associated with, and then accounts equal to count dot objects dot filter for this user. We need only the account of this user. We do not need account of everybody else. Now we are going to need two things here. We are going to create a graph. We are going to create the expense list. We already have created the form. There are three things in our UI, as you saw earlier. So we'll import our Plotly views here, the Plotly function. Import Plotly. You can write import Plotly directly, but I'm going to write import plotly.px or express as px, and from Plotly dot graph objects import everything. We're going to need a few more things here, so we are going to include those as well. From date util dot relative delta import relative delta. This relative delta will be used for manipulating our date-time field, date-time values. Now we also need a safe string for passing, for converting our Django JSON file for Plotly to the HTML renderable file. Django utils dot safe string. Otherwise, it will create some errors and it will display Django, etc. Import markdown safe. This stands for markdown safe. I think these should be enough. I am thinking what else could we need. Now we will also need some functions for calculating the sum of our expenses and the number of our expenses, etc., which will display on our graph and on our list. So we'll get our from Django db models, import sum count f. That's what we're going to need, and I think that should be enough for now. Plotly requires pandas to be installed, which I have not installed. I will do that quickly. Pandas, it's installed. Let's run server again. Expense form is not defined. Okay. Expense form is not defined because we have not included that yet here. So we must also, we're going to import that here from dot forms import expense form, and our server runs perfectly. Let's add our context data now. What else do we need here? We need to create an empty dictionary for storing our expense data to display in the list, and another for storing our expense data for the graph. You can do so in the same, but then you will have several duplicated fields for in your monthly list, which are fine for graph but not for the monthly list. That's why we are going to create two of these from account and accounts. First things first, we are going to loop through the account and check and see all the liabilities and then store it, or we're going to call it expense. Expense is equal to account dot expense is equal to account dot expense list dot all. Now for expenses, expense and expenses, this will be for our graph. This loop will be storing all the data in the graph, the expense data graph field, which we just created in that dictionary. Right. Now for expense and expenses, we're gonna check if expense was long term or not, and if there is some monthly value for that expense. Expense.monthly expense. If both of those are true, I'll have to check what I named here, monthly expenses. That's what I named that. I'll write that like so. And current date will be whatever the liability date is or expense date is. Then while current, we're gonna create another loop to include all the dates from the current date to the end date, so that it displays the long-term expenses correctly in the bar graph. While current date is less than equal to expense dot end date, the year month will be set to current date dot trf time person y person m. This will store date in the format like this, 2023-08 for 2023 August, right? Next we are gonna check if year month not in expense. If we have not added this in the graph dictionary yet, we add that. Expense data graph for year month will have an empty array, which we are gonna populate now. Next, expense data graph, the empty array will be appended. I wrote appended, it should be append. Like so, we have our name, which we are gonna take from the expense.name, whatever name the expense have, some amount. Here we are not gonna take amount, but the monthly amount for that expense, right? Because we need monthly amount for every expenses round. Next we need the date, so date, and another for end date, expense dot end date, like so. Below that we'll store our current date equal to current date minus relative delta month equal to 1. This is for looping, this is for moving to the next month. This would be plus, not minus, of course. Month equal to 1. This will move our current date to next month. Now we need an else block for if data is not long term, if the expense is not long term. Here we're gonna store our year month as the same format, expense dot date dot st rf time. You can store this year month above the loop and it's gonna work fine, or in that loop, inside that loop. I have done so. %y %m. If year month not in expense data graph, if year month not in expense data graph, we again create an empty graph for that year month, and then we start appending that. Here this must be appended outside of that will if block. Same here. Dot append dot that. Now if it's not long term, there's gonna be only 3 values: name, amount, which will be amount here because the monthly expense will be 0, such a case, and date. There will be no end date because it will be a short term one-time expense. Right. Okay, this error is because I am putting this else here, but this else is for this if long-term expense. And this current month will be the same line as that if block because it will be outside that. Okay, this should work fine. Alright then. Now we need to go through this loop once again for account and accounts for our monthly expense list. Now you can just copy paste and edit around a bit, and that's what I'm gonna do. I'm not gonna explain that line by line again because it's basically the same thing, but we do not have this while loop for considering all the dates between current date and end date. Okay then. So we have added our loop for monthly expenses list. It does not have that while loop. We are not considering all the dates from current to end. We are only considering the expense in every month. You can read it and understand it just fine in the GitHub repository. Now we'll create an array of dictionary for the aggregated data. Aggregated data, this will basically store all our data we need to pass to the HTML template. Expenses will be the sum of item amount for item in value. I'm gonna word wrap that. And then for item in value, and then for key value pairs, key value in expense data graph dot item for we are going to store the aggregated data for all the year months its expenses, which will be the sum of all the expenses in that particular time period, and from our expense data graph, right? That's our context expense data, which will be passing to, which will be storing in here, and a context aggregated data, which will store, where will store the aggregated data, like so. Now we need some graph data, which will create now and use that to generate our graph. Month will be equal to item, year, month for item and aggregated data. And then why is this giving an error here? It's not a tuple, it's a dictionary. I miswrote the brackets there. Expenses, same thing, item, expenses. For item and aggregated data, we need just two things. We need the months and we need the expenses for that month. Now that graph data is complete, and we need to use this data to create a Plotly graph. We can just pass this graph data chart, and we are going to store the chart in the same dictionary to make it easier later on if we ever need it. And generate graph, we're going to call this function that and pass on the graph data to it, the current graph data. Now we'll also create same field in our context called graph data. Here we'll mark safe, we'll call that mark safe, the markdown safe function explicitly mark a string as safe for HTML output purposes, right? We need to mark this safe because that graph should be displayed safely and not as a JavaScript code or JSON code or whatever. So graph data chart, that's what we're going to pass here, and then we return the context like so. Now we need a generate graph function using month and expenses. So we're going to create that here, def generate graph with graph data. Now in this graph data, we can just name this data instead of graph data. We can name it anything. We're going to create a figure using Plotly express function bar. We're going to create a bar graph. The x-axis will represent number of months or the name of months. The y-axis will represent the expenses. And the title of the graph will be monthly expenses. Right, like so. Then we're going to update our graph for our layout changes. It will be a tuple. X-axis should have a range slider because so that the graph doesn't take over all the screen size we have and go beyond that. We are gonna give it a range slider for some fixed input size. I'm gonna name that visible true. We can write visible false if you don't want to look at the scroll bar. Then we're gonna change the color of our bars and the background and everything else. For that we need paper BG color, which will change the background color of our bar graph. We're gonna make it transparent. So 0, 0, 0, 0. The A value here is important. It's for making the graph transparent. I will copy this line for our plot BG color, to change our background color of our plot, and then the font color will be RGBA 0001. It will be black. You can change it to anything else. Then we're going to update traces to change color of our bars. Marker color equal to, we're going to give it a shade of green. You can give it anything. Now we'll create a JSON file for fig.to.json and then return that graph JSON like so. Now let's look at our project here. I do not have any user yet, so we're going to create some user first. Register Azure, or instead of doing that, I will create a super user. Python manage.create super user, so that I don't have to follow the rules protocol here. Okay, I have a 2-letter password that I have everywhere else. Instead of registering, we're going to log in. I stopped that server. We're going to log into Azure with password 12. Page not found, because accounts profile, it's going to redirect us to accounts profile, but we want to be redirected to the home page. And here we're going to add a field, login redirect URL, and we're going to pass it home. So accounts, login, we write Azure 12. So this is our home page, and since our application is not giving any errors, our views.py is just fine, but we have not displayed any value here, so it's not going to show anything right now. So we go to our expenses list and we start writing our expense template now. But before that, I'm going to write my home HTML because we have not done anything in that yet. And it should display that page firstly before anything else. And that's why that's important as well. So firstly, we'll write load static for the CSS. We're going to write HTML, a head, some title, give it home, a link for the style sheet, percent static CSS home.css. Next, in the body, we're going to have a block content and an end block. And in this end block and block content, we're going to start writing our div. Our first div, firstly, we're going to check if the user is authenticated. If so, we're going to welcome that user. We're gonna name it. We're gonna write name of the user, right? Like so, user dot username. And we'll give a little link here to open the expenses page. We'll call it open expenses. And else, if user is not authenticated, we are going to display a div class called home, an h2 tag, welcome, a div class register for storing the register, registration links, percent URL register, register. We're gonna copy this for login, login like so, and then and if block here like so. Now our page, we do not have a css.home css. Static css, home css. We have that. I think this error is because I have not stored that in string value. String URL expenses. There is no reverse function. It's called expenses. I think I have not named it expenses, and that's why it's giving such error. Ticked object has no attribute item. Right. We are gonna name this one as expenses and our expenses page is shown here because I have logged in as Azure, so we are seeing that. Now if I log out and go to the home page, it's gonna display welcome, register, login. I log in, go to Azure, want to welcome Azure log and open expense. Now here we do not have the, here we have some errors in our views.py which I'm not sure why happening. If we check here, the error is here for expense data.graph item. Of course, item variable does not exist in that. its name should be items with an S. It's a small mistake, but yep, it works. Did you mean color? In the font color, I also wrote wrong spelling there. Font color. Received that it should be with an H. Now, template does not exist. This is the error we wanted because there is no expense list.html. Well, there is, but there's nothing in it. It's in the exp tracker and we are passing it expenses. Exp tracker expense list.html. Where is it connect? Where is it checking? Okay, it does not exist at. We're gonna get back to that firstly, but before we need to change our expense list.html. So we'll firstly change that. I just figured out the error. It's actually that I have again misspelled one name here in the views.py. It's not expense list, it's expenses list. This should work just fine. It's working fine. Right, now we need to write our templates. Firstly, we'll start with our load static function. Then we're gonna create an head, link, rel style sheet for static css styles.css. Copy that same line below with style.css. There are two style sheets I have. It's a bit mess, but I hope you bear with me there. Then I'm gonna add a script file for adding the bar graph Plotly. https cdn dot plot dot ly slash plotly slash plotly slash plotly latest dot min dot js, and we're going to close that script like so. Now with our head closed, we'll start our block content. Start our body, start our script. src another, we need some jQuery here. code.jquery.com jQuery 3.6.0 min.js. You can use a different version, but this one has all the features we need. You can use a more newer version if you wish. Now we'll create another script for our long-term checkbox for displaying the interest rate and end date field if the checkbox is turned on and not displaying them if it is turned off, right? Script. We'll start our document dot ready function. You can use an arrow functions here if you want. I'm not very efficient with that, so I'm not going to use them. Long-term checkbox. You can name that anything, and we're going to provide some ID to that. ID long-term, like so. Another field for another variable for long-term fields, whatever fields you want to display if that checkbox is turned on. So here we need hashtag interest rate, the ID for interest rate field, and end date field. Right? Now, firstly, initially, the starting will be long-term fields will be hidden. After that, long-term checkbox, whenever it's turned on, our change function is called and it's turned on, it's gonna call a function and then it's gonna check long-term. Whenever we click on that function, whenever on the checkbox, this function will be called. If long-term checkbox dot is, now we check if it is checked or it's not checked. Right? If it's checked, we write long-term fields dot show, like so. But if it's not checked, we write long-term fields dot hide, like that. Semicolon there, and the script is closed. Our script is done. Now we start writing our divs for the HTML content and the graph and everything else. First, we'll have a div class for main. This will be our main class. Then we'll have another div class for our image. We're going to include an image. src will be stored in the static images folder. Static images logo.png. We don't need to display any art there. You can if you wish, but I don't have to. Now we'll have another class. We'll call that main1 because it's the first div inside main. Another one for graph. And this graph one will have one for bar chart. And this one will have an h2 field for monthly expenses bar chart. Then a div for displaying our Plotly chart. And ID also will be Plotly chart. Close that. It will be controlled by JavaScript below. And that field's done. That's done. In the main one, we are gonna call another div and name that expenses, because this will show the expense list. Here I will give another heading for expenses list. This will be named expense and this will be named expenses. Yeah, I did say I was not creative with names. I just hacked together whatever names I could think of at that very particular moment. In here, we are gonna need a loop to go through all the classes for year, month, expenses, in expense data items. We're going to go dev class equal to month. This will display all the months. H3 month, year, month. Next we'll have another loop inside this for displaying every single liability or expense. For expense in expenses, div class equal to expense explicit. I'm going to name it that. Then there will be a div class for left side. In this one, we are going to have the name of the expenses, expense.name, and below that, we're going to check if expense dot long term is true. We're going to span a class for displaying both the from and to dates. Date from expense dot date br to expense dot end date. I'm going to word wrap that to make it a bit more clear. Now we need a else block. This will display only single span. For name will be same date, but it will just display the date, the current date, the date of the start of the expense, that is expense dot date, like so. And then this if block will end, and if this div will end. Now we need another div for displaying the amount. We'll call it right because it will be on the right side of the screen, and that particular div h2 dollar expense dot amount. You can write a rupee symbol here if you wish. Now in the right we have the expense amount. You can use the dollar symbol here. You can use a rupee symbol here, but I'm not using that because, well, I do not have the rupee symbol on my keyboard. Okay, then we'll end this div here and create a BR, and then end that for loop and for, like so. There is another loop here which we need to end, another and for there. couple diffs will be closed, and I think here we'll add another div for the form of the expenses. We'll call that lower, I guess. Div class, what do we need to name that? X form h2, add long-term liability or one-time expense. We'll use a form method equal to post here. Then we need to add this line again for our CSRF token. This basically generates a CSRF token and saves it in our local session storage. Now this will have our form dot long term dot label tag. With this label tag, we'll have form dot long term as well, just below that. Then a couple of break lines. You can store them in different divs and manipulate that as you like, but it's too much work and I'm not up to it. Okay, this should be enough. There are 4 things we're gonna need. Remove these. Here we need name of the expense, amount for that expense, the date, and below the date we need the end date, which we are gonna put in a different ID so that I can manipulate that using my JavaScript. I'm gonna copy that again for that end date. We don't need these PR tags in there. Okay, I'm sorry I copied that twice. Now with the break line again, we'll have one more for the interest rate. Interest rate, right? And below that, we'll have a button type submit class button success, add liability or add expense, whatever we want to name it. The form will close, the div will close, and all the div will close. Now we need to write our JavaScript here, where graph data equal to graph data safe. If it is safe, then we create a new plot using Plotly chart, which will be the ID. The graph data will be dot data graph data dot layout, like so. Close the script, close the body, close the end block. I didn't close this, so Paste that here. Like so. Alright then, let's see if our expenses page is working or not. And voila, it's working perfectly. Our image is here, our bar chart div, our expenses div, everything is here. Perfect. Now let's add some expense here. I bought shoes for $500, a bit too much. $50 on this date. And we are seeing an error. Cleaned date. Okay, it should be cleaned data. On views by line 61. Here. It should be cleaned data. It must have been some autocomplete that messed up. Cleaned date. There is no cleaned date now. Recent that name expenses is not defined in the models.py exp tracker models.py line 27.save. Line 27 name expense recent data open expenses. Our shoes are being seen here. It works perfectly. Now if we add some long-term data, car loan 200 or 200 is a bit less, 10,000 for 19/08/2025. That's 15% interest. Calculate monthly expenses not defined. It says in the models.py line 26. It's a function. Here we need to call that function from itself and should be named that. Expense object has no attribute interest. On line 36 of models.py, there's no interest, it should be interest rate. Monthly is not defined. On line 37, 1 plus, this will be 1 plus monthly rate. Monthly has no attribute monthly expense, it's monthly expenses because and it works perfectly. Yeah. We had to fix a little bit error here. Return round monthly expense with 2 decimal places. That we missed that while writing the calculate monthly expense function. So please fix that, and the code should work just as expected. Perfectly fine. We have our graph, we have our expense list, our form, everything working perfectly fine. So thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe our channel, like this video, and hit that bell icon. We'll see you in the next one.